All right, welcome back. As we are going through our 10th edition core rule book, we've gone over most of the rules, and this is going to be kind of some weird rulings or things that might need errata, things like that, that we're going to go over just to clarify that we've already gone over. Still have more of the core rule book to go over. We're going to do the stratagem videos later on. Those are should be coming out, maybe some of them at the same time as this, and then more in the future. But let's start with the weird rules. So, as we talked about before with the aircraft strategic reserves part, there's a weird interaction with they don't actually stay on the field. If they are the aircraft, they're required to start in reserves. Their points don't count towards strategic reserves, but as soon as the game starts, they become strategic reserves. So they are under all of the restrictions of strategic reserves. Minimum move is not clarified in rules as written so far. Again, will be in route on this, certain. Um, Basically, they don't meet the minimum move requirement whenever they come in from strategic reserves. So they basically immediately arrive, go right back to reserves without getting to pretty much anything. So that's going to get errata, certain on that, but the thing to keep in mind. The next thing, we're visibility of units versus unit distance. Um, this is a thing that we've seen in previous editions, but it usually trips people up, especially people who are, you know, new to the game or haven't played in a while. And that's unit visibility doesn't have a maximum range. If you can see a unit, any model in that unit, see the unit, it is visible. However, when you go to measure the distance between the units, for example, with your gun, um, you don't actually measure to the visible model. You always measure to the closest model in the enemy unit. So if there's a weird building that's got a corner in it, there could be a model tucked up in that corner. That can be the closest model. So when you're measuring charge distance or shooting range, you measure to that model. However, if you have an ability like a ranged weapon that requires visibility, whether or not that unit is visible is determined by whether or not you can see a model in the unit. It does not have to see the model that you're measuring to. Now, along with this, kind of goes hand in hand, is the woods terrain because it interacts with visibility. The way the rules are written, it is meant to encourage us to use the new woods terrain that GW is putting out and has been using for Age of Sigmar for some time. The way that terrain is set up is it basically is three separate single trees that have a little like part of a circle as the base so that you can put two or three of them together and make different size um, area terrain for woods. Because it is built that way, the rule is basically saying that the woods or trees themselves do not have to block line of sight in order for get some benefit of the trees. Obviously, if your model is small enough because it's a character or something like that, and the actually prevent line of sight, it does that thing. But let's say it doesn't because you have a full unit. Even if no part of the trees are blocking those models in that unit, they're never fully visible because the ruling of the trees says that all units, even if they're fully visible, if the trees are intervening in your drawing line of sight, then they're only considered visible, not fully visible. We're not 100% as to how some of that is going to interact. The difference between fully visible and visible is probably going to come up in different abilities and things like that. But right now, it clarifies the difference in the rule book. It doesn't actually have much of an effect per se. All right, so moving on, reserves. There's a whole table for the limiting of points and various things when it comes to strategic reserves. However, regular reserves, as we said before, do not actually have a limit. There is a play limit, basically, which is to say that if you put everything in reserves, you could technically leave it there till turn 5 and bring it all in. That you're going to lose because the answer is not only did you not generate points, your opponent's probably spread out and has no room to bring your reserves in, considering that they still have to be away and things like that. So There is a limit to your reserves, but there's not a rules written limit to the reserves. So then we go to moving through friendly models. You can move through your own models, unless it's a monster vehicle, which we'll get to that later. But as much as you can move through your own models, that is mostly beneficial. So you can move your heavy weapon guy first because needs to, get to a certain position of range or whatever else for his gun, and then you can move the others around him, which is going to be useful for us. Where it has a real restriction is in the fight phase, because they added that little word "must" comes to base contact. We have to make base to base. So when you are measuring your pile-ins and consolidates and that, you can move through your own model, which is going to be quite a few models that are going to, they were in base to base of the model in front of them in order to make an attack that turn. Well, what's most likely going to is, because it has a 3-inch move and can move through its own guy, it is able to base combat, even if normally in the past we would have had to walk around him. We're going to be able to basically walk straight through our guy. So we're able to make base to base contact, which means way more of our models are up in base of the enemy than we've seen in the past. And that's a weird thing. It's a mandatory, which is why we really have to keep track of it. But it's a thing that's new to the edition. So it's a thing that's, as much as it's mandatory, is probably going to get missed a few times until we get used to that. So on the fight phase and consolidating, there is a new weird interaction. If we go to consolidate and we can't get within engagement range, we can't consolidate. But we could consolidate towards an objective marker. If we do that, though, we can only consolidate up with controlling range of that objective marker. It doesn't mean we actually have to gain control of it, because obviously the opponent could also have models on that objective, but you have to get within 3 inches of that objective marker. If we can't on either point, either engagement range or controlling an objective, even if we could move closer, but it doesn't actually make that range, we don't get to move at all, which is a big deal. We're used to, over the last several editions, getting some movement in the fight phase, because hey, we did good, we cleared the unit out, good fighters, and we were excited, so we get that extra move, and that's just going to happen a lot less. So unit coherency is important. It's always been important, but basically, unlike previous editions, there is no specific check to the unit coherency. So basically, it says every time would move for whatever reason, charge or pile in and consolidate, or our regular moves during the movement phase, fallbacks, etc. Anytime we would move or could move, we have to maintain unit coherency. Now, let's say we can't. Well, then that causes two problems. One, if we can't maintain unit coherency at the end of the move, then we have to move back to our original position. We don't get to attempt to get some of them into some of them into unit coherency, and then the rest fall off. It's everyone reverts back to their original position, and then we start removing and destroying models until the unit regains unit coherency. This is actually pretty scary. It seems minor, it seems like we've dealt with this before, but it's actually real because of the reverting to our original position. So we attempt to move, we can't regain unit coherency, because let's say we had them strung out in a line, and we, like every other model, because that seemed like a good idea at the time to prevent a charge. Well, now when we go to move, we can't make unit coherency at the end of the move. So we revert back to our original position. And because we took every other model, no one is unit coherency, and we're basically going to remove every model until the original position maintains or regains unit coherency. which could mean we go all the way down to one model if we're moving every other model in the line. So this could end up being something that seems minor, but could have a major impact if we don't take it seriously. All right, so monsters, vehicles, specifically friendly monsters and vehicles, but kind of in general. So you can't move through your opponent's models either way, and that's okay. We're used to that. That's normal. The fact that we can move through our own friendly models is a nice extra bonus that we're getting. It's making things a little easier. We've kind of seen that in the past in certain areas. But they make a clear exception here for friendly monsters and vehicles. For no reason, basically, can you move through another friendly monster vehicle? That being said, why keyword gets around that, but that's basically the only way. So monsters can't do other monsters, even if they're all together in this unit. And the same goes for vehicles. So if you got a bunch of scout sentinels or that, and you kind of get clogged up in between the buildings, you're gonna have to one at a time and get your way through, which may hinder your movement, and it's gonna for sure hinder your things like pile in consolidates, at least compared to how we're going to see it with infantry for our normal pile-ins that must base to base part. And then dedicated transports. This is kind of surprised me. I didn't expect this, but it is something that we have to keep track of because it's another must. Dedicated transports, if they have that keyword or unit type, then at the beginning of the game they must start with a unit inside. There's nothing saying that, at least not in the core rulebook, it may say on the datasheet, there's nothing saying that dedicated transports are units. So as long as it's in the list, you could, between one game to the next, you could switch out what unit goes in where, but they must start with a unit side. If you do not, the transport will be destroyed at the beginning of the game. So it basically can't be deployed, is how it works. So that's a pretty big deal. It could just be a character you throw in there for a little extra protection on one. It could be a whole unit, but it has to have something in there. We can't just take a transport that has some good guns and treat it like a tank with, as a weapons platform. It has to have a unit inside.
Man, that's a lot of funny edge cases of things.
It is, and we want to point these out as early as we can, because we don't want people, especially as they're learning a new edition, to kind of get caught out and have this be a feel bad scenario. But more importantly, we want to kind of track some of these things, because some of these things, even if it's not like a, hey, I got you, sort of, like we're learning together, and that's great. That's what you want when you're learning the new edition, but it always kind of feels bad, even if we're not getting called out, to at the end of the game recognize, oh, I forgot this, or we did this wrong, and that could have changed something. So now, even if we're not mad at each other, one of those things that internally we're like, this would have changed the game, and that kind of feels like it almost invalidates certain parts, because if I would have done this different because the rules made me, maybe this other thing would have changed and I could have done better, or maybe my opponent would have won, so I feel bad that I
Yeah.
won but I shouldn't have, that sort of thing.
Well, we'll see how it goes. We're all learning. It'll come together.
Yep.
Okay. Cool. Thanks.